Welcome to the book of Romans, or should I say, Romans. I mean, this book has probably had a greater influence on Christian theology than any other book in the Bible. I mean, it opens with your lofty theology of justification in chapters 1 through 4. We are saved by grace through faith, apart from works of the law. And then it moves in chapters 5 through 8 to the life-giving teaching on sanctification, which happens by the Spirit through virtue of our union with Christ. And then there's even this beautiful call, this inspiring call in chapters 12 through 15 to present our bodies as a living sacrifice. But, I mean, given all of that, it can be tempting to view the book of Romans as a systematic theology textbook, but it is not a textbook. The book of Romans is actually a letter. Of course it's a letter, you know that, but we have to learn how to treat it like a letter. And that's the first rule. When you approach any of the epistles, you have to think in your head, I am reading somebody else's mail. It's a federal offense in the United States, by the way, but that's what we do as Christians. We read other people's mail as we're reading the epistles. And it's kind of like, honestly, it's kind of like we are overhearing somebody's phone call. No one has phones that are shaped like this anymore. They just put little Bluetooth devices in their ears and they're walking down the street and you can hear someone's conversation. You're eavesdropping on their phone conversation, but you're only hearing one side of that phone conversation. And that's what's happening with the letters. You see, just like a phone call, there's a whole backstory behind it. You know, the person who's making the call has a relationship to the person that they're calling. There's a prehistory between them. There's a reason why they're calling. And the same thing is true with the epistles. These letters were written by a specific person, Paul, to a specific people, in this case the churches in Rome, at a specific time, and there's a specific purpose and backstory behind it all. And we, as readers of the Bible, we have to take that seriously, and we have to try to figure out what that situational context is, which undergirds the text. So, what is the context, the situational context of the book of Romans? Well, most of Paul's letters are written to churches that he founded on his missionary journeys, but that is not the case with Rome, the book of Romans. It says in the opening verses of the book of Romans that Paul longs to come to Rome, but he hasn't yet. Paul longs to come, but as yet he hasn't. And in chapter 15, we're given the reason why Paul has yet to visit this church in Rome. So here we are in chapter 15 of Romans, looking at the text. It's getting pretty exciting. Here we are. Look at verse 22 with me. He says, the reason why I have so often been hindered from coming to you is up in, or he says, this is the reason why I've been hindered. And that reason is in verse 20. He says, Paul's a church planter by heart, you know? And we think of him as a theologian, but really he is a pastor and he is a church planting missionary. We see that in verse 20 where it says, I make it my ambition to preach the gospel, not where Christ has already been named. And Christ was already named in Rome. There was already a church planted in Rome, and therefore Paul's like, I don't have a great urgency to visit this city. That work's already been done. Now, most likely, the church was planted in Rome by Jewish converts, which became believers after Peter preached at Pentecost Sunday. I guess lots of Jews came from all over the Roman Empire, including Jews from Rome, became believers, returned to Rome, and founded a church there in the capital of the empire. So there's already a church in Rome. Paul's like, I don't need to come. But he's kind of at a moment of transition in his missionary journey at this point when Paul is writing the letter to the Romans. Look in verse 23. It says, but now, things are changing, he says, but now, since I no longer have any room for work in these regions, well, now I think I do have time to make a visit to Rome. And his goal with making this visit to Rome is to establish the city of Rome as a missionary sending hub. Now, Paul had already evangelized and planted churches and established elders in the regions of the eastern half of the Roman Empire. Look at verse 19. He says that by power and signs and wonders and power of the Spirit, the gospel went from Jerusalem all the way to Illyricum. Now let's look at a map just so we can see what he's saying. He's saying that the gospel, it went from Jerusalem all the way to Illyricum, way over here. Paul's missionary journeys were through Asia, Macedonia, Greece. I'm sure he sent people up to Illyricum. So the entire eastern half of the Roman Empire here, it's covered, it's done. We've already taken care of that. Paul's desire is to go west. Go west, young man. His desire is to go west, and he wants to use the church there in Rome, which already exists, as a missionary sending hub, which will be a supporting church for him to go west. And what's the farthest west you could possibly go? It's Spain. He says, I hope to see you in Rome in passing as I go on to Spain. And he wants the church in Rome to kind of be like his missionary I said sending church, but probably to support him financially. It says, and to be helped on my journey there by you, probably monetarily. So this kind of introduces one of the additional purposes or functions of this letter to the Romans. Paul has never met these guys in person, never been to the church before, but what he's doing is he's hoping to establish this relationship with them by teaching them or showing them, this is my theology. You know, these are my kind of credentials, you might say. This is what I teach. Justification, sanctification, my thoughts on Israel, and my calling to love. This is what I teach. This is my teaching. Are you interested in partnering with me in the gospel in the same way that the churches in Macedonia and in Philippi have partnered with me? So that's pretty interesting. Our next question to answer is, when did Paul write this letter? And it seems likely that he wrote it during his third missionary journey. And let me show you where we get that idea in the text. So, verse 25, he gives a temporal reference. He says that at present, right now, when I'm writing this letter, at present, I am about to go to Jerusalem, and I got a plan. I got a game plan. I'm going to go to Jerusalem. I'm going to bring aid to the saints. Now, do you remember, kind of scattered throughout Paul's letters, it's in 1st and 2nd Corinthians, as Paul was journeying through and planting churches in Asia, Macedonia, and Greece, he was collecting money from the Gentile churches to give to the Jewish church in Jerusalem because there was a famine there and they were suffering, they were very poor, they were impoverished, and these Gentile Christians were able to support them. And Paul's super stoked. He's about to drop off that gift, those relief funds for those suffering Jews in Jerusalem. He's about to do that. And so that means that gives us a temporal marker for when this is going to take place. Now, this little picture, you remember, this is Paul's third missionary journey, and this third missionary journey ends with him going to Jerusalem and giving the famine relief to James there in Jerusalem. So when during this third missionary journey do you think Paul wrote the letter to Romans? Well, it's not going to be in Galatia, Phrygia, Troas, Macedonia, or Miletus, because he was only there very briefly. His journey started by making a beeline for Ephesus, and he was at Ephesus for 2 full years. So that's possibly wrote the book of Romans during that time, and plenty of time to crank out a lofty work of theology. But the thing is, he wasn't just about ready to go to Jerusalem at that point. You know, remember, he says that at present, I'm about to go to Jerusalem. So probably not in Ephesus. Most likely, scholars agree that Paul wrote the book of Romans while he was in Corinth. Now, the book of Acts tells us that he was in Corinth for 3 months on this third missionary journey. And there's a couple of other clues that kind of confirm our suspicion that Paul wrote the book of Romans during those 3 months that he spent in Corinth. One of those reasons is that he sent the letter by way of Phoebe.
he's like, all right, Phoebe, I just wrote this letter. I want you to carry it to the believers in Rome. And he says, I commend her, and she is a servant of the church at Senecrae. Now, where is that place? Senecrae is right next to Corinth. See that? Corinth and Senecrae. So that seems likely that Paul was in Corinth. And then secondly, while he was writing this letter, Paul is staying at somebody's house. He's being hosted by someone, and that guy is Gaius. See this? Verse 23, Gaius is host to me. And we know from 1 Corinthians 1 that Paul baptized a guy named Gaius in Corinth. So it seems likely that Paul wrote this letter in Corinth. Let's specify that. Paul wrote it to Rome from Corinth. And let's put a little money sign on that bag, because that's what it is. Okay, so Paul longs to go to Rome here in the beginning of chapter 1, and here in the second half of chapter 15, he spells out his plans to go to Rome. Let's put that in here too. He plans to come to Rome. All right, let's see where we get here. So let's return now and talk for a minute about these relief funds that Paul is about to bring to Jerusalem, because they are really important for understanding even this book to Rome, the letter. So he's going to ask for prayer. Let's see, back to chapter 15, I'll make it a little bit bigger. I appeal to you, brothers, that you would pray for me. And he asks for prayer about two things. First, he says, I pray that I may be delivered from the unbelievers in Judea, in order that I may come to you and be refreshed by your company. So he prays that as he's bringing the relief funds to Jerusalem, he would be delivered from the unbelievers there. Now we know, unfortunately, that doesn't happen, right? So he brings the funds to James in Jerusalem, and then he worships in the temple where he is arrested. And then he's imprisoned for 2 full years, and only as a prisoner is he sent to Rome after that point. So that gives us an interesting backstory right there. So that's the first thing he prays for, that he would be delivered from the unbelievers in Judea. The second thing he prays for, now this is critical, he prays that my service for Jerusalem, these are the funds he's bringing with him, may be acceptable to the saints there. So his hope, his longing is that these funds, this gift, would serve as a token of unity between the Gentile churches, where the funds are coming from, and the Jewish church in Jerusalem. And you guys, like I said, this is super important because it really undergirds the entire purpose of the entire book of Romans. The book is about Paul. Well, the purpose of it is Paul is calling the believers in Rome to unity, specifically between the Jews and the Gentiles in the church in Rome. Now, if that's the dominant purpose of the book of Romans, we gotta make that case. We gotta spell that out a little bit more. We're gonna have to do a little bit of historical background in order to do so. So, a little bit of history. In the year 49, put a 49 here. In the year 49, Emperor Claudius, this is our Claudius, he expels all of the Jews from Rome. He's angry. We're going to give him angry eyes. He's going to shout. Ah! He's going to say, get out. Out, I say. Now, we know this historically from sources outside the Bible, but we're also told about this in the book of Acts. Acts 18. In Acts 18, this is Paul's second missionary journey, and he goes for the first time to Corinth. Paul left Athens, went to Corinth, and while in Corinth, he ran into Aquila, and Priscilla, and it says that they had recently come from Italy. Now think that's Rome, and why did they just recently come from Italy? Their home. Because Claudius, it said, had commanded all the Jews to leave Rome. Okay, so the year 49, Claudius says, all right, everyone out. But then 5 years later, in the year 54, 5-4, poor old Claudius dies. He dies, and his edict is revoked. So think with me for a minute. We have 5 years, between 49 and 54, where all of the Jews are expelled, exiled out of Rome. And the church that was in Rome was, of course, it was founded by Jews. I'm sure the majority of the members of the churches were Jews, but they evangelized their Gentile neighbors as well. And there were some Gentiles in the church. But now all the Jews are gone, and that Gentile minority, they become the leadership of the church. During these years, the Gentiles are the only ones who are leading the church. They're the guys. But now, when Paul writes this letter to the Romans in the year 57, the Jews came back. The Jews returned to Rome. And what do you think they're thinking when they get back to their home in Rome? They're thinking, I'm probably going to resume my position of leadership in these churches in Rome. But the Gentiles, they've been leading the church for 5 years, and we've been doing just fine without you. And now you want to kick us out and take our place as pastor over these churches? And there's these conflicts and there's these tensions between Jews and Gentiles, which has been going on for 1, 2, 3 years in Rome. And Paul writes this letter to heal these ethnic tensions between Jews and Gentiles. And there's a New Testament scholar by the name of Scott McKnight, and he wrote a book with a fun title. It's called Reading Romans Backwards. And he recognizes this Jew-Gentile tension in the book of Romans, and he says that there is a liability, or his thesis in his book is that the liability of us kind of reading the book of Romans is we can just be caught up in this lofty theology, and by the time we get to the end, man, we're kind of exhausted, and we can lose our perception of the significance of these final chapters as they speak to the purpose of the letter as a whole. But his counsel is for us to read Romans backwards, to start at the end. And if we do so, he promises that will bring into greater focus the specific concerns of this letter. Remember, we're eavesdropping on someone's phone call. We're trying to figure out what is the situational context behind this letter. So let's read Romans backwards very briefly and see how doing so clarifies the purpose of the letter. So the very last command which Paul issues in chapter 16 is that those in Rome should beware of those who cause divisions. Let's take a look at that. Beware of those who cause divisions. Romans 16. Here he says, watch out for those who cause divisions. And right before that, now you think of the divisions are most likely between Jews and Gentiles. Before that, he has, I think it's 15 different greetings. Look at all these things. Greet this person, greet this person, greet this person. He's telling them, greet these guys. Greet one another. Now, most likely, each of these, or it's quite possible that each of these different individuals represents maybe even a different house church in and around the city of Rome, and certainly the case with Priscilla and Aquila, he says, greet them, and greet also the church in their house. Well, maybe Urbanus, he's got a church in his house too. Now, when he calls them to greet one another, this is really a call to unity between the different house churches in Rome. All right, well, let's take a look at the rest of the book of Romans. In chapters 14 and 15, Paul is going to address a specific conflict between Jews who observe the Torah and the Gentiles who do not. And then in chapters 9 through 11, Paul is going to correct a misunderstanding of redemptive history, which the Gentile leaders most likely have in this church. They think that God has rejected Israel and that he likes Gentiles better now. So Paul is going to address that here in these chapters. And then in just these wonderful chapters 1 through 8, our justification, sanctification chapters, Paul is making the point that the ground is level before the cross. Both Jews and Gentiles are under sin and under God's wrath. And they are saved, they're justified in the same way, by grace through faith. There's no distinction and no boasting between them. And their sanctification also takes place apart from the law through the Spirit. And in our following lectures, we are going to look at each of these major sections in Romans, and we're going to see how Paul's, how his logic and how he makes this case. Specifically, that the book of Romans is about a call for unity, ethnic unity between Jews and Gentiles.